You're like the general who must not outshine the field marshal.
The last thing that the vice president needs to do is to be a threat to his boss.
I was in my office, and the next thing you hear is that there's a news item that you have been appointed the vice president.
He didn't waste any time. He said, you know, hapa iko kazi na sasa mimi hii kazi nafikiri wewe ndio unaweza.
I was the first vice president, not just to be handed that on a silver platter by being appointed, but a negotiated vice presidency.
I have been elected alongside the president. I have not been appointed.
The holders of the office have been variously described as being just a heartbeat away from the presidency. But for many, it has been a source of grief in the rough and tumble of Kenyan politics.
You don't overshadow your boss. You're like the general who must not outshine the field marshal. Yeah, you do not, whatever you do, you look behind your back, say, hey, is somebody watching me? Will I be reported? Is the boss himself watching my every step?
At the stroke of midnight, on the 12th of December 1963, Kenya became the newest nation on the planet, having endured more than 7 decades of colonialism. And the journey to this historic moment had brought together Kenyans of many shades and political persuasions. Among them, two gentlemen whose paths would cross many times and whose politics would define Kenya for decades. Johnston Kamau Wangengi, or Jomo Kenyatta, as he would later be known, and Obadiah Adonijah Oginga Odinga, the man many Kenyans knew as Jaramogi, who would become the second in command in the new Kenya.
Jaramogi engaged the colonialists with a debate in parliament that without Kenyatta, Kenya cannot be free because it's the one who started the war. But when he came out, he had an empire of his own.
The idea behind the choice of Jaramogi was great. He had played a huge role in galvanizing his community and that part of the country in Kanu. And the founding president himself also had a huge backing and needed a strong man to bring together a strong country, a strong cabinet, and forge ahead.
79-year-old Odinga Odera, who has now retired to his home in Siaya County, knew Jaramogi from early on in his life and rose to become his speechwriter. And he saw firsthand Jaramogi's rise and his irreconcilable differences with Kenyatta right after independence.
Jomo tended to steer away from what they had promised the citizenry. For instance, the land. The land was actually the big factor in disagreement between Jaramogi and Mzee, because Jaramogi and the other guys like Bill Kagia, for instance, plus a guy by the name J.D. Kala, all these are dead. They were very strong supporters of land being distributed to the citizenry. And Jomo, after becoming the president, did not actually live to the promises they had made to the people.
There was a group that wanted the marketplace, capitalism, and that of course was Jomo himself, and of course with Tom Mboya, who was a fantastic man. Then of course on the other side there was Jaramogi, who felt that you needed to distribute resources, and therefore he preferred not capitalism, but not communism either, but extreme socialism.
Those ideological differences played out right from the start, and within just 3 years came to a head. Jaramogi was kicked out of the Independence Party, and he immediately founded the Kenya People's Union KPU in 1966 and parted ways with Kenyatta.
He was the national vice president. He was also the canonized vice. And what they did to cut him to size is to create majimbo vice presidencies of KANU, such that you have a vice president for every province. And Jaramogi was supposed to be a vice president for Nyanza in that arrangement. And that's when he resigned. He said, can't have it.
At that time, Jaramogi was also grappling with a whole new challenge in his own backyard in the name of Thomas Joseph Mboya, the astute politician who hailed from southern Nyanza but had his firm roots in the city as well. Mboya was decidedly pro-Western powers and served as Jaramogi's counterweight in Nyanza.
What he was seeing Jaramogi as a threat. And he saw Kenyatta as he's becoming old. So he think he could pita kwa kati.
That explains the 64 Constitution, the Republican that we got in, which essentially said in case there is a vacancy, the vice president will not be automatically assume office. And remember that time Mboya was the Minister of Constitutional Affairs. So he ensured that that would not happen.
And of course, there were other forces than foreign forces which did not like Jaramogi because they thought Jaramogi was too leftist. The head of the VOA in Nairobi once told me at a party, he said, we in America, we don't like that guy, Jaramogi. He's left-leaning.
But 1969 would prove to be a decisive year in the Jaramogi-Kenyatta relationship. First came the shocker that was the assassination of Tom Mboya on July 5th on the streets of Nairobi.
The death of Mboya is critical because it tended then to unite, to bring together those who are loyal or claim to be loyal to Tom Mboya and those who claim to be loyal to Jaramogi. These had been rivals all along.
And that must have set the stage for the mayhem that greeted Kenyatta's visit to Kisumu in October of that same year for the opening of the new Nyanza General Hospital.
Kenyatta was in Western Province. He went to open what we call now Webuye paper mills. But before he reached here, he had a real message. First of all, he wanted to ban the KPU as a political party.
I myself went to Jaramogi and told him, don't go to Kisumu. Because the president is going to Kisumu, don't go to Kisumu. There's going to be a problem. Because I got a hint that something is going to happen. I personally did it. And he said, oh, let me just go and see what's going to happen. Because I remember when the president started his trip to go to the Western Kenya, he started in Nakuru, then ended up in Kakamega. He had made some statements, and those statements, one of them was that the KPU at that time had sent people to China. And who was the guy sent to China? That was me.
When he was approaching the gate, the main gate of the Rest Hospital, some other people were wearing KPU shirts. And they began to say, Dume, Dume, tunataka Mboya, tunataka Mboya. But Kenyatta's people opened the fire on people. And on the ground, they killed so many. I can remember we counted the 11 bodies on the field. But we were lucky enough. Before Kenyatta sat down, we took Jaramogi me and Sefenia Mauji saying he's still alive is coming from Sagongo area. We took Jaramogi up to stairs and we rescued his life. The following day, we went to Bonda, to Uyom and Madiang. When coming, we found so many GSU at Jaramogi's area at home. Next morning, it was put under house arrest. Before the end of it was around 30th or 31st, Jaramogi was airlifted to Manyani Orlokitang. It is where he was detained up to 1972 and he was released.
But the bitter fallout between Kenyatta and Odinga would mark the end of an era in the position of vice president. Kenyatta had to make the next pick carefully. Never again would a vice president be so powerful.
Now, his choice of the next vice president is different. He goes for Joe Murumbi. Joe Murumbi is a bit, you cannot say he's Luo, he's Kiku. No, he is Goan, so you cannot pigeonhole him into a community. He is less assertive, therefore gives the founding president room to assert himself.
In no time, Joseph Murumbi was out. And in came the man who would later become Kenya's longest-serving president, Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. Moody Awori was old enough to make sense of the day's politics, and he recalls how Moi played his cards so well that no one would have guessed the former school teacher had bigger plans up his sleeve.
He was an extremely hard-working vice president. You know, Jomo didn't like to fly. And as a member, Kenya, as a member of OAU at the time, a member of the Commonwealth, a member of the United Nations, which needed the head of state to travel all those trips, it was Moi who was making them. Within the country itself, as a troubleshooter, to go and quell problems here and there, he was. I think he was an extremely effective vice president.
Moi played a very quiet man, always coming across as humble, always coming across as loyal. Some would say too loyal, and he never did anything to show that he wants the office. But of course, he wanted it. He never showed his hand. A brilliant politician, a very patient politician.
Despite Kenyatta's seeming soft spot for his deputy, many analysts say it was never a bed of roses for the man who would later describe himself as a professor of politics.
There had been an attempt to keep Moi out. And in fact, when as vice president, without Kenyatta's protection, Moi was really misused by people around. But Jomo knew that this is the person who should take over from him.
When the chance came, the Sharif Nasirs did not just spring out of the blue to say we don't want an election. No, they had always been there and knew their man. They had always been there and knew a time will come when we'll play this game.
So for some 12 years, Moi bid his time, never showing his hand. And when he took over the reins of power following the death of Kenyatta in 1978, he had his script ready on how to pick a vice president.
It is said that there were two contenders for the vice presidency, and that Moi supposedly preferred Dr. Gikonyo Kiano, supposedly. And some other forces favored Mwai Kibaki. But overall, the picture was that Moi would pick somebody from the mountain.
He needs the Kikuyu. The Kikuyu have lost Kenyatta. They are asking themselves, shall we be close to the center of power again, or shall we be cast aside on the periphery? No. Moi, as I did say, a politician's politician. He appoints Mwai Kibaki, his vice president, and the entire country settles, says, right choice, experience, big community, economist, former minister for finance. We are in safe hands.
And that's why I guess he came up with the slogan, Nyayo, we shall continue the same policy, don't worry. And to assure you that it will be the same policies, I'm picking a very nice man.
Moi had learnt over the years that if he ever took power, he had to run a tight ship where everyone, including the second in command, towed the line. There could only be one boss at a time, went his logic.
The whole structure was that everybody is actually reporting to the president and not to the vice president. At that time, there was that direct linkage, and the president sometimes would just call directly. He was an interesting president in that sense. He could either call a PS directly, he could call an MD in an institution directly. So that was how his style was.
His list of vice presidents would include high-flying economist Mwai Kibaki, who would later become Kenya's third president, Dr. Josephat Njuguna Karanja, who was forced to resign in 1989 in the face of a no-confidence vote in Parliament, Professor George Saitoti, who ended up being the longest-serving vice president in Kenya, and Musalia Mudavadi, who served for barely 3 months in the dying moments of that administration. Mwai Kibaki stood out for his academic profile and attempting to inject his professional knowledge into a job that was seen as being largely political.
Using the clout of vice presidency and his training as an economist and therefore as a minister of finance, I think these two combinations made him very, very effective.
But he too, like former vice presidents before him, would run into trouble.
There was a minister from Taita who invited the vice president to a Harambe, and he was sacked. That was a very strong message. Kibaki had to protect his friends, so he was not going to tell them, hey, I'll come to your Harambe. Now he concentrated in Othaya because actually he was confined to Othaya. Patient again, biding his time, sitting tight. But a time was going to come when Moi would get rid of Kibaki. And he did. After the infamous Mlolongo elections of '88, he demoted him to the Ministry of Health.
But perhaps the most dramatic of all the vice presidential tenures under Moi was that of Professor George Saitoti. An unassuming academic, Saitoti was plucked from the university by President Moi and fast-tracked to the plum job of vice president after cooling his heels as board chair at the Mumias Sugar Company and Kenya Commercial Bank. William Ole Ntimama was one of the leading Maasai leaders who pushed for Saitoti's election as MP in Kajiado North, even declaring him the Maasai spokesman.
We have always been yearning for unity, and we have always been yearning for a leader that when he called the leader of the Maasai community. And so Saitoti came up. He was in a very good position in the government, and we thought we could prop him up, you know, as a leader of the people to talk on our behalf inside government.
The professor of mathematics fought hard to blend in, but his troubles would come soon enough. In the run-up to the 1997 general election, Saitoti was caught up in a messy succession battle. His dual ancestry of Maasai and Kikuyu that was earlier seen as an asset had suddenly become a crippling liability, as Maasai elders such as Ntimama, who had earlier stood by him, now appeared to magnify his Kikuyu ancestry to further alienate him.
Well, we had to give him a chance. And I wouldn't say anything really negative, but he needed time maybe to really polish up and get some direction.
Saitoti was fought from many fronts within KANU and was to face what was considered his biggest humiliation at Kasarani on the 18th of March 2002, when his name went missing from the delegates list. Apart from the entry of Raila Odinga, whose party had now merged with KANU, Saitoti's position as vice president was further weakened when the party changed its constitution to provide for 4 vice chairmen instead of 1. That episode would produce one of Saitoti's most enduring statements that followed him for the remainder of his life.
There come a time when the nation is more important than an individual.
Late Saitoti did not read it in good time. Although the writing was really, as they say, on the wall, we should have read it that early. So we mobilized the KANU delegates machine, and the rest, everybody then agreed to the script. And that's how, because by the time we were getting to Kasarani, the die was already cast.
Of course, Moi is a politician, a strategist in politics. The fact that he brought Raila in was really a political strategy. And because he wanted Uhuru, he had to put aside people like Saitoti, who had a lot of power and worked so long in this government. But people wanted change.
Saitoti bolted out and teamed up with Raila Odinga, who had himself been incensed by Moi's surprise decision on his preferred successor.
Lakini nimeona mpaka nikaona kwamba nataja moja kwanza, alafu watafanya na wengine. Na huyo ni huyu mzee Uhuru Kenyatta.
The former president had decided that he wanted Uhuru Kenyatta to be the flag bearer of KANU. And having made that decision, the mechanics of how to get that happen now became the issue. A few of us who were then around there tried to persuade him to leave it to us to manage, the whole scenario, so that it doesn't bring about a fallout in the party. And we were unsuccessful in persuading it to leave it to us. And therefore he pushed, because, the harder he pushed, the more uncomfortable it became. And even Uhuru Kenyatta himself would have wanted it done differently.
Well, it was a revolution of sorts. People wanted change.
Our complete undoing was when they went and teamed up with the Kibaki team. Then our goose got cooked. I remember in Kasarani during the 50th anniversary, when there was a series of songs that were done. And one of them that was sung in between there was I Am Unbogable. That song reminds me of Uhuru Park, those days. We were so much in trouble when that song was sung.
Musalia Mudavadi was next in line, having chosen to stick with KANU after a brief walkout with the rebels. He got his moment of fame on November 4th, 2002, when he was appointed Vice President just over a month before the general election. And true to the tradition of the office, he was just as surprised as other Kenyans by his appointment.
I was in my office, and the next thing you hear is that there's a news item that you have been appointed the Vice President. So that is how it happened.
We had to push for Musalia's appointment because he had become the de facto number 2 or running mate, although there was no such provision. He had become the running mate, and it was an attempt. It was an attempt to bring on board Musalia and a bloc around him.